This is Rebecca Clark, episode 53, Ambition, with Cheryl Johnson. This podcast is for anyone that knows they haven't yet found and offered up their best work, but are compelled to seek it out and do it. Are you ready to move your desk? It's always a pleasure to interview people that I've worked with over the years, and so I'm glad that I'm able to introduce you to Cheryl Johnson and her new book, Ambition. Now, full disclosure, I did not have time to read the book before I interviewed Cheryl, except for scanning the first few pages. But I have since read the book because I wanted to make sure I did so before I had this podcast go live. And I think the goodness in that is that I didn't give away a lot of what was in the book. But we were able to honestly talk through some of the topics like failure in this interview that I didn't already read about. What I most appreciate about Cheryl is that she is a living example of her book. She is extremely ambitious, and it was really insightful and humbling to hear her stories in both the interview and the book and realize that she was an example of what I need to become, to be persistent and tenacious and to keep working and moving forward despite challenges. And she has a lot of experience in the learning space, and learning professionals are constantly challenging themselves to figure out what learners need, so that they can experience what is necessary to perform whatever it is they are seeking to accomplish. And so Cheryl definitely comes from the perspective of a person that's been in the world of training and development and technology over the past few years. And I think that this would be a valuable book for you to read if you are in the learning space as a professional, or if you're a person that knows that you want to offer up your best work, because we can bring a lot of intelligence and knowledge to whatever we do, but we also have this whole slew of other attributes and qualities that we bring to that work. And I think Cheryl touches on a lot of those in this book and is encouraging us to have more grit and resilience and to keep pushing forward and figuring things out. So take a listen to our interview.
I think you and I are kind of in the same boat. We've been doing learning and development for probably as long as we've been adults, right?
Right.
I always joke and tell people, they said, where did you get your education from? I said, honestly, it's from having kids. I've learned more about learning and development from having 4 kids than I ever did in school. Even though I have a master's degree. By the time I went back to school, I was one later in life, and I had already had 4 kids. And I had started a business working with people who had disabilities and helping them set up their assistive technology. And at the time, assistive technology was really new to the market, and there was a lot of challenges in getting the software and the hardware to talk to each other effectively, I should say. They generally would talk. I knew nothing about computers when I first got started in this industry. I was married to my first husband, who was blind, and that's kind of what started us down this road. And he was like, this is a real good niche market. We both want to be self-employed. He knew how to use the technology, but obviously he needed somebody who could help him set things up and get things going. And I can't even tell you, that was probably one of the biggest challenges I've ever had in my life. I am not a technical person, but I had to learn to be technical in a hurry. In addition to that, I also had to learn the software side of things. And so there was 2 types of assistive technology that we were working with. One where you talk to the computer, the others where the computer talked to you. Well, my husband had the side down where, the computer talked to you because he was blind, and that worked out well for him. But my job was to do, the voice recognition part of things. As part of my learning journey, another tremendous learning experience, and I talk about it in my book. I remember we were 4 kids, blind husband. We were poor. That's an understatement. I mean, like really poor. we somehow managed to come up with $10,000 to become a reseller and to go to this training that was going to take place. We lived in Wyoming at the time. It was in Boston. Got to the training site. I was exhausted, frustrated, wasn't in a good frame of mind to be learning, especially learning something that I was absolutely not good at. And so I'm not exaggerating when I say the whole 5 days I was there, nothing went right. Absolutely nothing worked. Everybody else in the class is moving along and doing really good and get through 2 pages, and I get stuck, and then we have to fix the computer, and then they bring in a new computer, and then we try this, and I was just like, by the time I got home, I literally was in tears. I threw my laptop and the manuals in a closet and said, I'm done. We've wasted $10,000 plus all of our travel expenses. This is it. This was the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. But
wow,
I'm too persistent. My new husband now, he calls me a pit bull. Once I latch onto something, I have a hard time letting go. So a few weeks later, I finally pulled the manual out, pulled my laptop out, and I started going through it piece by piece. Thank goodness my brother had gotten into computers and he was accessible by phone. This was in the days before cell phones even. And living in Wyoming, it's especially when you're in remote areas, connect with people all the time.
Right.
But that was probably one of the most eye-opening learning experiences I ever had, because all those things that went wrong, I now knew how to fix.
Oh.
And that was going to be the next 5 years of my life, just going around helping people set up their computers. And all the things that I learned just by watching somebody else during those 5 days fix all the problems that we encountered, I would encounter as I was going out. And I'd be at some remote place in Wyoming and not have access to good phone service or whatever. And so I was on my own. I had to figure things out. There was no internet.
Yeah.
This is how long ago this was, right? Can you remember the days when there was no internet?
Right. The encyclopedias we'd learn from and hope they had the information.
Amazing they had computers, huh?
Right.
But they did. So it was just amazing to me. And as I started going through my tutorials and stuff, I always used to joke I'd stay one lesson ahead of the people I was teaching. Stayed one lesson ahead of them, I felt okay charging them for my services.
And they did pay you, it sounds like.
They did. And it actually turned out to be one of the more profitable ventures of my life.
Wow.
But
and the greatest challenge too, right? The greatest challenge turned into something that was giving you the best return.
Yes.
So interesting.
And that's what I tell people. When we take people to training classes, we set everything up so that everything will work right. We're so focused on everything being perfect. And I'm like, you are denying your people the most profound learning opportunities they will ever have.
Yes.
And people, when they pay for training, it's like, and I was the same way. I went and paid $10,000 plus, and I was like, this was the biggest waste of my money, but it wasn't. And then as I got out into, started marketing my services a little bit, people with disabilities, like all of us, but come in really a wide variety. I mean, I'd have people who had vision impairments. I had people who had mobility impairments. I had people who had learning disabilities. I had people who had, I actually had doctors and lawyers also, because they wanted to use the voice recognition side of things. So I had people across the spectrum, and the tutorials that I were given just were written for one size fits all kind of thing, and it just didn't work. Where I started writing a lot of my own training was customizing it to each individual. We talk about learning styles. I'm not talking about learning styles. I'm just talking about different people with different needs. And in addition to that, if I would go in, I worked for the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. And so my job was to get these people who were disabled employment. And to do that, they also needed to learn software, not just the assistive technology, but they needed to learn whatever software it was the company they were going to work for had. So I also had to learn all that software. So I was just in this constant state of just learning all kinds of new things. In addition to that, I had 4 kids, and each of them still had their own unique way of approaching things. And so it was just like, wow, why do we think that learning should be one size fits all?
Right.
So that's kind of where I got started. And then when I went back to school later on, it was probably 10 years after all of this, I honestly, maybe it's rather arrogant, but it's like, I could teach these classes and yet I'm paying somebody for this. And I needed that little piece of paper. For some reason, people thought that little piece of paper was really important.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of where I got started. And then I started working for, various companies, and each of them had their own unique approach to things. But one of the things I found that was really missing, and that kind of leads into the whole book idea, is I was just amazed because from the time I was young, I realized not all people, because all people are different, I was born with this insatiable need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought everybody else was too. And so that's kind
Whoops.
of where my informal research, I haven't done, a bunch of studies that are been validated by anybody, but just my informal research into all of this is like, once this revelation came that, wow, I'm kind of weird. Not everybody likes to learn like I do. And a lot of that honestly came from my youngest son, who had a learning disability. And you can imagine, with him in school, he had what they called auditory processing challenges, which doesn't mean that he couldn't hear in terms of his ability. If you gave him a hearing test, he'd test just fine. But he couldn't process sounds correctly. And it wasn't until many years later, I actually took an auditory processing test myself and found that I had some of that. And like, wow, especially when you're young and in those formative years when you're trying to learn to read, if you can't process sounds or hear sounds correctly, if your brain doesn't process that information correctly, can you imagine how hard it is to learn to read and write?
And probably you sit there when people are saying, yeah, we're fine, we understand, and realize that you're the only one perhaps in the little group you're in. We're saying, oh, I don't think I quite heard it, but I'm not going to say anything.
But you
I'll
don't
just sit
know
here.
that you didn't hear it correctly.
Oh.
That's the bigger challenge. And so obviously he struggled, and thank goodness he wasn't really a troublemaker. A lot of kids that have learning difficulties tend to be troublemakers. He wasn't, but he was definitely one that just kind of sat in the corner and got ignored. And so through the tremendous amount of intervention that we took with him, I learned so much about what motivates people to learn. And how do you take somebody who really struggles to learn, isn't like me, doesn't just get excited every morning when you wake up, like, what can I learn today? Is like, oh, please, do I have to learn something new today?
Yeah.
Do I really have to do this? This is no joke. For those of you out west, it's a lot different than it is here in the east. But we lived kind of out in a area way on the outskirts of town. And his school was literally out in the middle of the desert. And
Oh.
there was no fences around. This kid was in 4th grade when he started skipping school.
Oh,
And
wow.
he would rather sit out in the middle of the desert by himself than go to school.
Just because he was so unsure of what was being said, if he was processing it correctly, or
No,
he just liked being alone.
no. It's just that school was such a struggle for him, and he just wasn't learning. He wasn't progressing, and he was having to go to summer school because he just wasn't passing the tests. And it's hard when you don't understand why you're not. And even we didn't understand why.
I think I'm just barely understanding in the last few years why I didn't like part of school, right?
Yeah.
To realize that I actually was a very motivated learner, but some of the social situations
Mm-hmm.
were too intimidating for me. And so I'd pull back or try to hide or worry about different things that had nothing to do with the subject matter I was actually interested in. And so I think, that being multiplied across all the
Mm-hmm.
different people in a classroom, you wonder, there's probably a very small group of people that actually enjoy the way it's set up and get to perform their best in that
Yeah.
environment.
There's so many things that go into learning and what
Mm-hmm.
motivates people to learn. Like you said,
Right.
going to school, my son's challenges were academic, if you want to call it that. Yours were more social, but all of it is relevant. All of it plays into your ability to have success, and success is what kind of motivates people. If you're a really adept at social situations and you're really smart, you probably do real well in school. You probably think things are great. But
Mm-hmm.
even with that, you'll find comes challenges. Another business in 2008, and that's the business I've been working at right now. The majority of the time that I've been doing that, I have worked with college students. Some of them came really motivated and excited and others weren't. And once again, I'm going back to, okay, why is this one so motivated and this one's not? I learned a lot about myself, and I learned that my style, I ask lots of questions. I always want to know what's going on. I'm not afraid to admit I don't know something. So I'll be like, hey, I don't know how to do that. Can you show me how to do that? And some of these kids were just like, no, they would never, never, never ask questions. And then they'd turn in work. And I'm like, you clearly didn't understand.
I think a lot of us learn through the education system that, you're supposed to do things right.
Yes.
Versus, like you were saying before, like allow for error, allow for
Yes.
challenging moments and that kind of thing. So we learn that it's okay to ask questions and to fail at something.
Yes. And see, that leads me into the whole other section of my book. And it talks about failure. And I've had multiple failures in my life. And you would think I would just give up and lay down and die at some point and say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to take the easy route. And goes back to the pit bull.
Right. Everything I've been learning lately, I'm glad that people are talking about it more, is that you're failing forward so you can get to success, but you can't get to what you want unless you fail and try. Otherwise, you just give up and don't even completely pursue it. So being a pit bull serves you well.
It does and it doesn't. Sometimes you have to let go. But this is interesting too, because when I first started bringing up the concept of failure, people were like, "Ooh, that's a bad word. Don't say that." And it's like we have to reframe it into another falling forward, or all these words we come up with for failure. And finally I was like, no, failure hurt. I don't care how tenacious you are. I don't care how persistent you are. People, I think, get the misguided conception that if you're a person like me, that you don't ever get discouraged and that failure doesn't hurt. And I said, no, I'm intentionally using the word failure because it hurt.
Right.
It evokes a certain feeling inside of you, which lends itself to self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
What went wrong? You've got to be careful how you manage it so that it isn't a devastating, I'm never going to try again kind of experience. But that's a motivating factor. Failure can be a real motivator if you let it, but you have to let it hurt.
Right. You have to learn how to manage and allow that kind of emotion and kind of honor it.
Yes. And 2 weeks ago, I've been in the process of how many years of trying to build this learning platform to support this learning process, this action learning process that action learning isn't new, but there's never been technology to support it. And I've been for years and years trying to do it. And for all the technology experience I've had, I'm still not a software developer. I haven't come up with that one yet. And I don't even want to. I'd rather pay somebody.
Right.
But I just, I sat and cried. I was just like, I've tried so hard for so many years and this just isn't working. And my husband's like, at some point, you just have to give up. You have to say, cut your losses, move on.
Open yourself up to another solution that maybe is better for you to spend the time on.
Yeah. And it just literally, and then I came across this life coach or business coach, and even she was like, you just need to let go. I'm giving you permission. Just let go. And that lasted about 2 days.
Did you come up with a different idea to accomplish it? Or you're still kind of pecking away at it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, it still hurts. I still cried. Right. People think that if you're this kind of person that for some reason you're immune. And my husband especially, he's lived with me for 20 years. And he's like, I didn't think you got discouraged. I'm like, okay, where have you been?
Well, but, people assume that you get to a certain level of success that you're no longer going to have those feelings. And yet, if you're continuing to reach, you're probably going to have those feelings just as much or more because the risk taking increases, or the desire to create above and beyond what you've created tends to increase. And there tend to be more critics and more things coming your way, like the more daring moves you make. So I've been experiencing that recently as I make a lot of changes and interact with coaches and people who have taken big leaps, and they're like, people think we don't experience pain. We have to get coached all the time. They're making millions of dollars, and they're like, we have to get coached all the time. Like, oh, okay, at least that's an expectation that I have now. Like, oh, this will never end. This is part of the deal.
Yeah, it comes with the territory. And I'm also a certified coach. And I have a hard time because that's kind of one area that I don't really develop, because part of me is like, you'd think I'd just be a real optimist to get through all of this and to keep, but there's still a very jaded part of me. And as I'm coaching people, I'm like, you have to expect that life is going to be challenging. You have to expect that these storms are going to come. You have to expect, and I'm like, oh, I'm painting this out to be so bad nobody would ever want it.
In the process of that, painting the picture that the difficulty's worth the price that will be paid. And I think it's interesting, like I'm just looking at how you started your book, with the intelligence quotient, emotional intelligence quotient, which are two kind of things you hear about, emotional intelligence, especially the last few years, but this ambition quotient, and realizing I've thought a lot about this, not in these terms maybe, but the last few years, especially going, wow, if you want someone to have something, what would you want them to have? High intelligence or emotional intelligence or ambition? Even though you don't typically have to make a choice, right? Everybody has a little bit of it, but that ambition and emotional intelligence is huge in being able to work through failure and to keep going, keep learning and contributing.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I say it's the missing piece.
Okay.
Certainly for years and years, we hired for pure intelligence. We assumed that if you were really smart in school, you were going to be successful in the workplace. We found out in a hurry that really wasn't the case. We learned people needed to be able to have these emotional intelligence skills, communication, empathy, those kind of things. Yeah, that's great. And I think that's important. But if people aren't ambitious, if they don't have the natural inclination, and it doesn't have to be natural, it can be taught, and that's what, I won't give away all the things,
all the secrets,
but believe me, it's a very short book, and when you read it, you'll just be like, this is such common sense. This is so simple. Why?
Yeah, a lot of common sense isn't common, as they say, but it's also good to have a reminder of common sense sometimes, because we're so enamored with big, complex solutions or processes, at least in corporations and large organizations, right?
And that's been one of the challenges I've faced as I've tried to market myself in the corporate arena, is that they like all this Six Sigma and, all these process-driven, which are great. I'm not discounting those.
Right.
But they get so complex sometimes that we forget how simple it is to do things sometimes. And like, once again, one of the stories I tell in my book is about my youngest son. Is he's working for my brother in an electrical apprenticeship program. And one of the challenges my brother was having is hiring a bunch of these 20-year-olds that, but they all came from the world of, we go to school and we go home and play video games. This idea of work we're so used to being told what to do that we don't know how to think for ourselves and actually act proactively. And
right, we're order takers.
Yes, very much so. I'll get sidetracked here for just a second, but they did a study and they went around and they asked all of these high-performing students at a school, what is it that makes you successful? And you'd expect them all to say, oh, I worked hard, I did my homework, I studied, extra hours, I participated in all these extracurricular activities. Across the board, overwhelmingly, like 80-90% of them said, I learned to give the teacher what they wanted.
Oh. Yeah. That's so interesting. And then to send out all of these people into the world that are thinking that way. Yeah. Trained to think that way.
Yeah. And so we're producing all of these kids, and that comes back to, Josh Bearson calls them power skills, and he defines them a little bit differently than I do, but I just call them my ambition quotient skills. Or employers across the board for years now, for the last 10, 15 years, have been saying the key attributes that are missing in their employees are creativity, problem solving, communication, team building, and resilience.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and that to me is the ambition quotient. If you can teach these kind of things. So my brother, back to this story, was, he's like, how do I teach these kids to be creative problem solvers, whatever? And I said, well, you have to give them the opportunity to fail. And he's like, oh, no. I mean, these are electrical apprentices. I can't, if they fail, they're going to shock themselves and die or burn the building
That's
down.
Motivation to learn.
I know. It is. So one of the ideas, we talked about a lot of different things, but one of the ideas I gave him, he says, we have these safety meetings every Friday, and these kids just sleep through them. They're at 7 o'clock in the morning on Fridays. I'm like, well, number one, it's 7 o'clock on a Friday morning. You'd probably be sleeping too if you weren't conducting it.
Right.
But nonetheless, we'll live with that. You can still keep it at 7 o'clock on a Friday morning. I said, but instead of standing up there teaching, I said, why don't you have them teach it? He goes, oh, no, these guys know nothing. I can't have them up there teaching this. They'll teach everybody all wrong. And I said, no. Let's step back a little bit. I said, since he's your nephew, start with him first. Spend a week preparing him for it.
Yes.
He knows he has to get up there and deliver this on Friday morning at 7 o'clock. He'll bring some donuts and some coffee or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to want to look dumb.
Right. That lights a fire right off underneath you. Right.
And guess what? He's going to be learning all this information and preparing for it. And it was just amazing. He tried it and he was like, this really works. These people they're finally getting it. They're finally taking the time to absorb it. And you need to give people the opportunity that's not necessarily failing, but give them the opportunity to learn something and then teach it.
Creates a safe space for them to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And to know that, I've been given approval ahead of time to do this imperfectly.
Yes.
But even so, I'm going to try to learn everything I can about it and do my best, which is not the motivation they had the week before.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other interesting part was, I'm like, okay, first of all, you're not going to put, my son up there teaching a bunch of other, novices and have no one in the room who knows what they're talking about, right?
Right. You'll have a guide on the side kind of thing. Yeah.
And if he says anything wrong, you can very gently, point out that maybe there's a different way of doing things. Or if something comes up that he can't, if they ask questions and he can't address them, then together you kind of figure things out instead of just giving them the answer and saying, look on page such and such of your manual. Who cares? Nobody's going to look.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. And I mean, sorry, there's no Six Sigma process for this. It's just common sense.
Right. And when you have learned about Six Sigma too, you realize that that's applicable in very few environments. Really, most need about half that Sigma, right? Like as long as we streamline a little and get lessons learned and best practices, we can stop getting down into the minutia and we can actually use our minds to come up with some solutions. In fact, I really like, I talk about it a lot actually, the blank piece of paper, like having people get used to having a blank piece of paper and learning to just think and come up with a solution instead of being an order taker saying, well, what should I do? What should I do? And saying, no, here's a blank piece of paper. You go think about it, figure it out. Then you can go do your searches online or compare to other stuff, but start being okay having a blank piece of paper to start working from versus having a step-by-step, this is how you do it. Because it forces you into thinking of things and you always come up with more than you thought you would, at the beginning of the process. But it's interesting when you're talking about this and looking at this book on how in organizations, especially, it's amazing to see how many people are very smart, but somehow thought somewhere in the process of getting hired, I got hired because I'm smart, and then don't apply some of the same principles that got them to where they are at in doing the job. It's kind of like, oh, I got what I wanted. Now I'm just going to be an order taker, right? Versus, oh, this is a chance to keep contributing and to keep trying to add value in different ways and try to not just show up 8 to 5, but to really become someone that's helping make great changes or contributions or whatever is necessary in the organization. And it's been really interesting to discover that over the years, even at high salary levels. And to see the difference between someone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and learn no matter how much education or experience they have, and others that may have more experience in education than others, but aren't seeking to be that ambitious person. They just want to collect the paycheck.
And I think, And this is one area where, I wasn't this way, but, I'll be vulnerable. I can't even say the word. Vulnerable. It's a word I don't like, so I can't even say it.
Right.
But one of the things that's been really challenging for me is that I like super creative, and I love problem solving, and I mean those things all kind of come natural to me. But it's interesting that a lot of times employers are looking for that, but yet they don't really want it. They want it in the way
Right.
that fits their mold. And as a contractor, being a contractor for all these years, when I first started contracting, I'd go in and I'd have all these ideas and, this is great and we can do this. And oh man, here's all these wonderful ideas. And they're like, no, why not?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Can you give me a reason? No.
It's almost
And
like
then,
it was too far beyond their understanding, or they
yeah.
didn't know how to manage that.
Yeah. And in addition, I'll take full responsibility for my end of it. I wasn't really good at making my case. I wasn't really good at presenting, The communication part is something I've really had to work on. And I've come a long ways, but still have a long way to go. But, it would be a couple days later, as a contractor, they can fire you because they don't like the fact that you have blue eyes, They don't have to have any reason. They'd come in and they'd be like, oh, sorry, don't have a need for you anymore. And talk about failure. This would happen time and time again. And it wasn't always for the same reasons. And many times it was, because as a contractor, you also learn they'll come in and say, see you later. But they won't tell you. They just cut the budget the day before. And really the only reason you're out the door is because of the budget. Or somebody else came along and wanted that position. Or there could be all kinds of things that have nothing to do with you.
Yeah. Right. So many factors. Yeah.
After years and years of this, I just got really discouraged. I just got to the point where I'm just going to go in and be an order taker. And unfortunately, that started working for me. I was like, I'm not going to go in and, yes, they saw my portfolio, they saw my resume, they were all excited. That's why they hired me. But really all they wanted was somebody to sit down in front of the computer and create online learning, or online reading is what I call it half the time. Yeah. And so I got to the point where I was just like, okay, this is how if I want to keep getting paid, this is what I have to do.
I've heard this story before, right? Many times, of people that are very ambitious, wanting to like push the limits, help the creativity, and getting pushed back and going back to that order taker mentality, because that's what the system rewards. And it's sad because it's squashing like real talent and real creativity that could come out into the world. And I think some of the organizations die when times get tough because they haven't allowed that in their environments. And then you see other environments where they're allowed to thrive. But, when you're sharing how 90% of the people said they just gave the teacher what they wanted, and then you realize, well, if you have large groups of people leading and managing that think that way still, they are not going to know what to do with someone like you coming in, because you are not going to just follow what the teacher wanted, and then they don't know what to do with that information. But they can understand. Yeah, you challenge the status quo. And so then when you drop in line, like even though they see all your capabilities, you drop in line, they're like, okay, this is going to be easy. Yeah, I can handle this. She can go do the work. I understand these things coming in that I'm looking at. But it's sad to see a whole group of people that, I guess when you're talking, made me realize that there are some people that are probably very ambitious, but just decided to play by the rules and are hiding it and are just waiting for someone in the organization or to get into an organization where someone will allow them to be free to demonstrate their full capability or capacity in this area, which I guess is part of your book as well, right? Like those, and you shared an example even of your brother, was it? Yeah. You're allowing him to have the students teach on Fridays, and to have those kinds of ways of designing an ambitious workplace. Is there another example that you wanted to share of what organizations can do to design more opportunities to be ambitious, I guess, in the workplace?
That would be giving away my whole...
Oh, the whole deal.
But on that note, it's interesting because you did bring up something, is I really believe because of this whole COVID-19 thing,
Mm.
organizations need people that are creative problem solvers, that are resilient,
Totally
and that
agree. Yeah.
they're having to rethink their whole business model. I mean, we're no longer just tweaking things around the edges. If you want to survive
Yeah.
in this world, you need to have people who are like this. And if you want these types of people, read my book. No, but the beauty of it is it's so simple. It's not like you're going to have to implement these very complex processes and do a lot of documentation and a lot of, work. It's just not even a minor shift in the way you think. It's
Mhm.
reminding yourself of what you already know. And this is really interesting because I've been working at the University of California here for about a year, and I just adore my boss. He is just awesome. He does. He respects me. He kind of lets me do what I want to do. But I've been mentoring these interns that we've had 5 interns working for us. Some days I'll come to him and I'm just like, oh, I'm just so discouraged. How am I going to get them past this hurdle? And he goes, well, remember in your book.
Sometimes we have to learn from our own words.
And I'm like, oh, yes. And I feel sheepish. I'm like, okay, yes, I really promise I did write the book.
Yeah, but like you said, you might feel some of these ways naturally, but then in order to do certain work, you have to fall into line with another method. And you can sometimes forget your own
Yeah,
wise advice.
yes. So I've been really fortunate, and I've told my boss numerous times over. I mean, in all the years, there's only been 2 bosses I've ever had that I can honestly say I just absolutely respected them and would work for them forever if I could. One of them retired when I was working for her many, many years ago, and she's since passed away. But I've told him that the only reason I'm at this job in California when I live in Virginia
Mm-hmm.
is because of him. I said, you let me be me, and you go to bat for me when the boss comes in and says, I just want you to go do things the way we've always done things. And he's like, that's not why you hired her.
It's interesting that you said you've only had a couple of bosses that you feel like they've allowed you to be you, and yet you're sharing stories that predate the internet, right? It's kind of a sad
Yeah.
thing that over that period of time, so few bosses have allowed this to be a factor in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's more interesting to me is when I interview, that's why they say they hire me.
Right. And then don't know how to support that.
Yeah. I really think you've hit the nail right on the head there, is that they don't know how to support it. And they're so afraid of letting people off their leash for fear,
Mm-hmm.
that they might run in the street and get hit by a car, or that their
Yeah.
organization might be something devastating will happen. My cousin called me the other day, and they own their own business and they build cabinets, and she wanted to put this leadership program together where they promote from within. And so they're taking all these people who are typically your assembly line type workers who are building these cabinets and wanting to put them into managerial and leadership type positions. And she was asking me, what kind of qualities would I be looking for? What kind of qualities would I want to be training these people to develop in order to move into these types of positions? She started with skills, what kind of skills? And I'm like, no, 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 no. Managers do not need technical. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying they don't need technical skills because that's not true. But what they really need is to understand what motivates and inspires the people under them. And everybody knows the answer to that question, because if you ask somebody what motivates and inspires you, that's going to be what motivates and inspires the next person.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few things that are so generic across the board. And that's why my book is so short and so simple, is because these apply across the board. They're so easy.
Yeah. Well, we make it so hard. Like, I know that's one of the things. And in fact, I'm going to share this in a different episode with more stories. But like when I was in the middle of a chief learning officer certification and I'm reading this book and it has this very complex page that I'm taking notes on about motivation structure in an organization, like how to motivate, incentivize, and all this stuff for people. And it was so detailed. And I remember that was the moment when I was trying to absorb it all, was I don't want any business on trying to expend all this energy on motivating someone. Like, I want someone who's motivated. And then the key for me was like, if they're motivated, how do I support them in what they are already motivated in? Or how not to demotivate them, at least, right? Because a lot of times these organization structures and policies demotivate motivated people.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And
That's
so
hard to say.
it is. But apparently it's very easy to do.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
And so that was like a turning point for me, where I was like, I was thinking about, who do I want to work with? Who do I want to spend time with? And I worked with a lot of very motivated people, but it was amazing how those that weren't motivated or didn't have the ambition, that you're talking about, how that could impact a whole bunch of people
Mm-hmm.
if they were allowed to operate from that space of not having that ambition or not caring about what others were motivated by. And it was kind of a big aha to me. And of course, we're working on some very large implementations
Mm-hmm.
of systems, and you start to see the ripple effect of that. And it's just a very interesting.
It is interesting. And what I find interesting is that misery loves company. We've all heard that. So the person who's not motivated, the person with a bad attitude, the person who just shows up every day, that's very contagious. But
Yes.
on the flip side, what's odd to me is people who are really, really motivated, that can be very contagious, but people don't know how to mimic it. You know what I mean? But
Yes.
if you're optimistic and really perky, people are like, ew. And people make fun sometimes of people who are really perky and optimistic.
You can't win anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
And so,
But you find this nice little balance between the two.
but when you
Right.
find people that are motivated, that are ambitious, rarely do you find people criticizing them or saying, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be Little Miss Sunshine, or I don't want to be, Mr. Grumpy, whoever,
Mm-hmm.
but I do want to be that person. I just don't know how.
Right. You're making me think of some experiences and realize that as long as that person that's motivated has a very central goal of performing and helping everyone around them perform, they can be someone that people feel like, hey, can I talk to you? Can you tell me how you did that? Once in a while, you get those that are doing a good job, but they refuse to share information with others because they perceive them as a threat or something. And no one wants to work with these people, even though they know they're getting stuff done. But when it's that balance of person where they're motivated, they're ambitious, and they're not overly perky, like you said, they're just generally positive and trying to work hard to do the right thing. If they can combine that with being open to sharing how they think and how they do that with others, it can be a very valuable experience for everyone involved.
There's a big difference between a person who's motivated and ambitious in terms of, I want to succeed, but I want to take people with me, or I'm
Yes.
very motivated and ambitious and I'm going to step on whoever I need to get where I want to go.
And news travels fast
Mm-hmm.
in whichever direction that is.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I come to this from my perspective, leading and managing primarily from the end where we were hiring contractors. And I look back at those things that I did successfully or that others have told me were successful, and I realize it was common sense. And you're saying your book is full of this common sense, but some of it was very basic, just decisions I made. And you couldn't point to one theory or blessed business process reengineering process approach or change management approach, but they ended up working very well. And then there's other times where you tried to do something very prescribed or by the book or whatever and ruffled feathers or didn't quite accomplish it because you were so overly concerned with following a particular method or process. And so I appreciate that it's filled with common sense that people can apply, even just taking one principle or one idea from the book and making a slight change. And even that story, I love the story, you shared about your brother and having the students take that action, because that kind of switch is a really huge change in outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And the students actually learn to enjoy it. It's like, hey, I want to see how my classmate's performing up there. Oh, I better do more next week because look at the great job they did this Friday, and I'm up next week, and the bar has been
and I don't want to look
raised.
stupid.
Right.
And it's going back to church, a young man, because we also have youth speakers, and a young man got up and started to give his talk, and he was about 15 to 20 seconds in, and he hadn't said anything. 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a long time, when they're up there. And he like mumbled a few words, and finally he was like, I didn't prepare this talk, but my parents made me get up here and give it anyway. And he sat down.
That's a step.
And you know what? I saw him give talks after that, and he was always prepared.
Right. And to allow that experience.
Yeah, that failure.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny is the people in the congregation weren't critical. Everybody I talked to was like, I am so glad his parents made him do that. And then they said, we're pleased that he did that he,
Yes.
what I mean? That he still was willing to get up there and admit that. And they respected him for that. But still, it never happened again.
But that's a wonderful story to share. And I know that that's something I've been taught. In fact, I was going to make the list today. Make a list of your mistakes. Have a failure list. Plan to fail. Mm-hmm. Because the more you fail, the more you learn. And the more you learn about what not to do, what you can do, what you can tweak, and to realize that is the path to getting to the answers, to getting to the next big thing. So I do love that story.
I think every manager and every parent should get a coaching certification.
Yes, I agree. Because it changes the person getting the certification so much. Mm-hmm. And then they interact with others so differently as a result, right?
And they allow people to fail. And yet they coach them through to success.
Yes. No, that's a great plug for coaches there, right?
Yeah. And guess what? Every parent's always asking, where's this manual to teach me how to be a parent? I said, if you want it, go take a coaching certification.
Oh, okay. That's good advice. I hadn't thought of that. I got to start telling people that. It puts you face to face with yourself and are able to then show people their own mind and thinking.
Thing is there can't be too many coaches in the world because we all need a coach.
That's something that I have learned, that if I stop getting coached, my coaching skills go down. And I'm just building my coaching skills. In different environments, you use them in different ways, right? And I've mentored over the years or trained or given advice or been the guide on the side, whatever you want to call it. But then to learn there's another way of helping people through thinking about things and moving toward their goals, and to allow all these failures that I'm making, I feel like are failures as I progress on this journey, realizing I have chosen to be an amateur in a new area, which means I'm going to have more failures up front. And I have to allow that, because I allowed that back when I was a kid and then in college and in every new job. And to still allow it. You were never too old to keep pursuing. That's why I'm excited to share the book. I'll put the link in the notes for everyone to go. It's available on Amazon.
Yes.
I know that. But thank you for sharing just some little tidbits from your book and some stories. And I know that I'm excited to share this with others and glad that you came on the show.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the show today. If you enjoyed it, I'd love if you'd write a review and share the show with your friends. Sign up for a weekly nudge at moveyourdesk.com. See you next Monday.